Thanks both, and lovely to hear that clip. We will be paying tribute to David Wilkie later in our programme. Also, as well as all the election latest, we'll discuss tears at the post office inquiry and Chef Heston Blumenthal's call for businesses to welcome more neurodivergent employees. As the price of olive oil soars, are we using too much of it? And Vicky McClure's nocturnal TV thriller, will it be thumbs up for a bank holiday binge?
On digital radio
and on BBC Sounds.
BBC Radio Scotland.
Welcome to Saturday Mornings here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Shereen and my guests today are food and drink writer Rachel McCormick, screenwriter Sergio Casci and Martin Raymond of Cloudline PR. Good morning, all of you.
Morning.
Good morning.
And plenty to talk about this week, yes, as well as all the election latest. We'll discuss tears at the post office inquiry and Chef Heston Blumenthal's call for businesses to welcome more neurodivergent employees. The Beach Boys get the streaming documentary treatment. And as the price of olive oil soars, are we using too much of it? Plus, if you're looking for a bank holiday binge, could Vicky McClure's new nocturnal TV thriller be up your street? So let's have a listen to this week's big moments.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future.
A chance to change for the better. Your future, your community, your country.
In an independent Scotland, never again will people here be subjected to an unelected Tory government.
Try one more time from the top.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beach Boys.
The Beach Boys just represented some sort of fantasy.
They were participating in the creation of a California dream.
David Wilkie is absolutely superb. Look at him go. And it's a new world record for Great Britain and David Wilkie. What a swim!
The
diagnosis is the potential for superhero or doom and gloom. We're the superstars.
Well, that is where our future lies, Rodney. Second-hand motors. This time next year, we'll be millionaires.
All that and more to come here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Shereen Nanjiani. And get in touch with your thoughts on anything we're talking about this morning. Drop me a text on 80295, that's charged at your standard message rate, or use the hashtag Shereen on social media. We're going to start today with some TV, starring Line of Duty's Vicky McClure and also made by her production company. A new nocturnal thriller started on Paramount Plus this week. Called Insomnia, it's based on the novel by Sarah Pinborough. Another of her novels, Behind Her Eyes, was also adapted for Netflix a few years back. We reviewed it and all agreed it was nuts, but very watchable. So what about this one? Well, in this, McClure plays successful businesswoman and busy mum Emma. Just weeks before her 40th birthday, Emma stops sleeping, hence the title. And it isn't long before that drives her to distraction.
You look pale. What's up?
I didn't book an appointment, Dr. Sanford.
Come on.
I'm fine. I'm just not sleeping great. So here's one for you. Can insomnia run in families?
Sometimes. Depends what's causing it.
Stress, probably.
Well, call me if it carries on. There's no point being a martyr about it. There's medication to be had. Em? No way. How did you remind me?
Because I'm so busy at work.
But it's your 40th. We should have a big party, you know. Get the decks out, glow bands, week to recover.
No, thank you. Maybe next year.
Yeah, Em's mum died on her 40th, so I think she just wants to get past it.
OK, but I don't think she does get past it. Sergio, what do you think of this? I mean, this is the first episode, very much a set-up episode. We can't give any spoilers away, but there's various weird things going on.
There's a lot going on. I found it engrossing. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great take on a sort of classic story, which was, is something weird happening, or is she going mad, or is it both? And, that's a story that's been told many times, but I think they tell it really well in this one here. I think Vicky McClure is fantastic in this. I think she's an incredible screen presence. I thought that all the acting was good.
Leanne Best is very good as the sister.
She's great as the sister. And I also found all the relationships within it very believable. The only one I had a bit of trouble with was the husband. I mean, I've only watched 2 episodes.
Oh, you've watched as many as 2,
I've
right? I've only watched one.
Yeah, I would have watched more had I had them available. I really got into it. But I found the husband a little bit too agreeable. But that might just be at the moment. I don't know what's going to happen. I found him too consistently nice. I've never met a husband who's always nice.
Apart from yourself.
Well, I come close, but perfection. No, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. Really classy. It was a smart and classy show.
Are you're familiar with Sarah Pinborough's work? Because I said we did review it a few years back. It was kind of, I think it was in the middle of the second lockdown, actually, where I was just prepared to watch anything that was nuts, and it was nuts, and any direction you think it's going in a completely different direction. You think, what on earth just happened? And there was an incredible, weird, mad twist at the end.
Well, I've met Sarah a few times because she goes to the same book festivals that my wife Helen goes to. So and she's one of those rare writers who's very accomplished as a novelist, as a prose writer, but also as a screenwriter, which isn't that common. I can't write prose for toffee, but I'm a superb screenwriter. she's very, very good at both. So I'm a wee bit jealous from that point of view.
Martin, how was this for you?
Well, I think of this as kind of homes and garden TV, because one of the lovely joys of this is that the The set design
Great
is just
kitchen.
so perfect.
Great kitchen.
I'm not a fan of islands, in kitchens, but, apart from that, it was beautifully lit, lovely lighting in the kitchen, and all these little tiny details of middle-class life, the Japanese beer and the wine coming out of the wine cooler.
Yeah, but
It's
you always know it's going to
beautiful.
fall apart.
It's just like my house, actually, to be honest. But it's one of these things where it ticks along going, look at this beautiful, perfect life. But for me, it kind of ticked along just a bit too long. And I was quite keen on a mad axeman suddenly coming through the door to break up this beautiful middle-class family life that they have here. I thought it was a slow burn. But if you like slow burns, this is a good slow burn. And I also... in a impatient way, jumped ahead right to the very end.
What?
And
You've completely spoiled it for yourself.
I did, because I knew I wasn't going to watch that. I wasn't gripped enough for that.
Don't spoil it for us.
But I did want to know what was going to happen. So my recommendation is...
Are you the sort of person that reads the last page of a novel?
I've never done that. I've never done that with a novel, but I did in this case, because I knew I wasn't going to stick with it all the way through. And if you're prepared to stick with it, and it is quite slow to begin with, then I think you'll find you are rewarded. I give no spoilers away on that.
You just spoiled it from yourself, Martin, really.
I spoiled it, but I did that. I sacrificed my enjoyment so that I could allow other people, encourage other people to do it. It is a bit crazy, wild and crazy plot-wise, but... it is worth sticking with, and I agree. I thought the acting was absolutely fabulous, and the kind of production values around these. We used to think of TV was like somehow second-rate feature films, and kind of cheap, but not at all. I mean, this is. Wait till you see her office. Her office, God, the boardroom of the office has got like the best view in London. It's absolutely astonishing. So the whole kind of mise en scene, as they say, just that whole kind of putting together of it is great. Unfortunately, a lot of it takes place at night, obviously, because it's about insomnia. So I had to turn up the brightness on my computer to actually see what was going on in quite a lot of these, and it is pretty spooky. Overdone flashbacks and so on as well, I would just as a critique. But I think if you stick with it, you'll find it worthwhile. But that's based on looking at 10 minutes out of every hour of the 6 hours of
Yes, and you were lucky enough to get a screener. I think viewers to Paramount Plus will only have 2 episodes, and then it's one a week after.
I'm a privileged reviewer.
Privileged.
I'm on the inside track, yeah.
What did you think of what you saw, Rachel?
I agree that the production values were quite fantastic. I think my issue is you spend 47 minutes watching someone not sleeping. It's really hard to make that compelling. It kind of made me realise that you could write that in a way that's incredibly compelling, because anybody who's ever been really tired knows it is the inside of your head is going crazy.
Yes.
But to actually watch someone who's got insomnia, you're just watching someone like scratching their face and with really wide open eyes. And I think that was my problem, was I thought there's something really compelling going on inside her head, and they've not quite developed a sort of easy accessible TV way for me to be inside her head and see how difficult that is. So all I'm watching is somebody with their eyes open. It made me really want to read the book, because I do think somebody who can't sleep is really compelling, but actually that was my problem. I thought it was too slow, and I wasn't really sure what it was about. And I thought this is a really interesting premise, but they've not quite made the transition to screen interesting enough to hold my attention.
Yeah.
But they have made me incredibly interested in the story, and I would read the book, because I think it must be really interesting to read about how someone feels going through that insomnia, and the fear that it's something to do with an inheritance in your family that isn't good, and all those kind of things I found. And there's another couple of things I think in the first series that they set up quite obviously that you've got to keep your eyes going, oh yeah, that's going to be, there's something going on with the daughter.
There's something going on with the husband. You think, oh, this must come into
there's quite a lot of very obviously well-seeded seeds kind of for you to have a look at and go, yeah, that's going to come back in another 4 hours. I'm going to get a payoff for this, that they're showing me this for a reason. So there's quite a lot of red flags in the first episode of keep your eye out for these things. which I thought was done really well. My only problem is I don't think they succeeded in making Insomnia compelling enough to watch.
I wonder, I mean, I found the first episode a bit slow, and, you know, sometimes there is, I'm not sure how many episodes this is, but there's a temptation in these streamers to make them too long. You know, it might have benefited from fewer episodes.
I mean, I generally agree with you about that. I think there is you know, once you've set up the world and once you've won an audience, you want them to keep coming back as often as you can, and so you do make too many episodes. I have to say, I didn't find, I'm a terrible one for getting impatient. I didn't find it slow at all. Maybe I was just in a good mood when I was watching it. And I thought again, I'm not particularly one to notice a film's aesthetic. You know, I'm quite word orientated rather than image orientated. But it was beautiful, like, you know, the colour palettes, everything was greens and blues, except when they had the flashbacks were sort of golden brown. And I thought all that stuff worked really well. Maybe they just got me on a good day, because I didn't find it slow at all.
Okay.
But the other bit I think is that does give you an interest in it is that the relationships between the characters are very good. I'm an only child, so I'm always really interested in these sibling relationships and how they develop over time and how tensions around them are resolved. And that as just a piece of, you know, not as a piece of psychological thriller action, but just as a bit of kind of drama, just as relationship drama. I thought the relationship between the two sisters is really interesting, and the way that develops, because that really does develop and change. Again, not to give you any spoilers, but that is an evolving, developing relationship. So that, I'm always interested in that. And an only child, I know nothing of this, you see. You know,
okay,
brothers
right.
and sisters.
Well, you've intrigued me enough to stick with it just to see where it goes. There are 2 episodes, am I right, Sergio?
I think so, because I watched as many as I could, and it was just 2. Some of us weren't lucky enough to have us. You know,
you've got to be in the inside track.
Well, if you have Paramount Plus, there are 2 available now, with the next episode coming out on Thursday.
BBC and
Radio 1's big weekend's on the way. We're heading off on tour. We're going up to Sunderland, cause we've never been there before. The lineup's looking good. They've got some great big names so far. Just hope that unlike last year's show, this time it's a free bar. The Chris Moyle Show.
And still to come here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Shereen and Jani, we'll be looking at how the election campaign is panning out so far and how much is too much when it comes to olive oil. Rachel, yours is a kind of garden-related moment.
Well, we have new neighbours next door who I think they've been there about 4 months, and they've now finally, for their toddler, built a kind of sand pit, but it's not sand. There's obviously modern parenting is an entirely new world, and they've got like wee pieces of bark, tiny wee pieces of bark, and they've got like a really nice.
I'm just thinking
slide.
Skelves.
No. It's like really soft. It's like really soft kind of wood chip kind of bark. I don't know how to describe it, but it's.
I know how to describe it. Cat litter.
Well, no, you see, I don't think it is, because I think that's why they don't have sand. That's why it's bigger pieces, even though they're not sharp and scale ridden.
Right.
And so they've got this really nice. They've got this beautiful wee slide, and they've got some wee boat thing that's kind of like a seesaw for this wee boy to play in, and he's having none of it. He's sitting out there in the rain on Wednesday in the absolute pouring rain with his wellies on, refusing to come in, just sitting down, lifting up the wee bark, having a look at it, and just straining it through his hands. And you can see his mum thinking, it's raining and there's a slide and you're having none of this. You just want to sit there and pick up all this stuff and just put it through your hands. It's very funny.
Good for him.
But I do think it's also cat proof. There must be this kind of bark that's cat proof, because we've got too many cats that walk in and out. So
yeah, because I remember when we got 2 cats just when our neighbours put in this lovely sand pit for their kids, and the cats thought, this is lovely, a nice wee toilet for us. Never got used as a sand pit again, I'm afraid. Sergio, your moment of the week is still to come.
Yes, it's this evening. I'm going to attend the launch of the first novel by the Glasgow newspaper legend David Belcher. And people of a certain generation will remember him as being the must-read TV and music columnist for the then Glasgow Herald. I mean, as I say, a whole generation of people grew up in his writing. It was, if you hadn't read his column, you didn't know what was going on, and it was described as it was worth buying the Herald just for his articles. But anyway, he's written his first novel, and it's of particular interest to me because it's about a Scots-Italian journalist who retires back to the family home, which is very, very like my own hometown of Barga, although it's not called that. It's a place which is, chock-a-block full of Scottish people who've gone back. They were fish and chip friars and they've retired and they've gone back to Barga. So he's written this entire novel around it.
Were you the inspiration?
No, I wasn't the inspiration, but I was in Barga a few times with David when he was visiting it, and it was a real joy to see him discovering it, because it's this weird, lovely, beautiful place, but it's so weird that it's chock-a-block full of people from Paisley and Largs and Greenock and Glasgow and all that. I just think his army of fans who've been without his articles for all these years now have an entire book of his wonderful writing. It's called The Newspaper Man, and anybody I think who is in the media industry in Scotland, especially newspapers, will find an awful lot of very nostalgic memories in it. It's really worth it, I think. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, Martin, let's go to your moment, and your moment is also kind of based on a book.
Yes, because last Saturday, on the one day of summer that we've had so far this year, I went into the Dark Theatre, such as my commitment to culture, to see Maggie and Me, which is a dramatisation of Damien Barr's novel, well, his memoir. So not a novel, a memoir, although he would say it was crafted and shaped into something that was very different from actual life. It was rather unfortunate because it was such a beautiful day. I could see that had affected the size of the audience in Perth Theatre last week, but I enjoyed it very much. I'd read the book before, and I loved the book because the book is full of real ambiguity and nuance. I mean, it's a terrible story he has to tell, but it all ends well. And then I'll give you a spoiler here. So you've got the theatre. It'll end up okay. But it ends up okay because he wrote the story. So it's going to resolve itself positively. Great piece of theatre. I chooch too long, maybe. You'd have maybe taken half an hour out of it. I would just to be a little bit critical. But in terms of just exuberant, intense and engaging theatre, it was the kind of best of National Theatre of Scotland. I think they do this kind of theatre really, really well, and have done really since the beginnings of the National Theatre of Scotland. Great performances. A really small cast playing lots and lots of different characters, and a story that is full of terrible darkness, but ultimately a lot of light as well. And it looks at things like communities, because we all think now the communities are lovely things, they're really important things and supportive. Communities aren't always supportive. Communities have got a life of their own. They can be as hostile and dangerous as they can be supportive and helpful. So I loved it. So it was worth missing a sunny afternoon to go into the theatre to watch it.
Okay, let's move on.
This
with my guests Rachel McCormick, Sergio Casci and Martin Raymond. Now, just like the Downing Street rain, we didn't see this coming.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
Yeah, that was the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announcing the general election for the 4th of July. And later that same evening, the Labour leader Keir Starmer set out his stall.
Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election, a moment the country needs and has been waiting for, and where, by the force of our democracy, power returns to you. A chance to change for the better your future, your community, your country. Now, it will feel like a long campaign, I'm sure of that. But no matter what else is said and done, that opportunity for change is what this election is about.
Well, the First Minister, John Swinney, said the decision to hold a general election as Scottish schools begin their summer break is the latest act of disrespect from the UK government. Brian Taylor of the Herald considered what the calling of the election means for parties in Scotland.
The parties are seeking at this stage to define the battleground and indeed to choose their competence. So when we hear from Rishi Sunak targeting the SNP, by contrast with his message south of the border where he's targeting Labour, why do that in Scotland? Well, partly because in 6 seats they are defending. The SNP are the party that's second, but it's largely actually an attempt again to choose the battleground, to polarise the debate between independents and the union, hoping that as they would see themselves as the most prominent party defending the union, they gain. Now, the SNP say, no, we're the party to kick out the Tories in Scotland, but they add for good measure that Scottish Labour MPs, they would just simply see them as Westminster ciphers. And the SNP, like John Swinney, will repeat this message daily, saying they are the only party to put Scotland first. Labour, Anna Sarwar argues, Scotland can play a big part in changing the UK governance, but gain influence as a consequence. And then we'll have the Liberal Democrats saying they can build a bloc for change north and south of the border.
Well, we can talk about that shortly, but let me take you back to Wednesday when the rumours, when were you first aware of the rumours starting to swirl that there's going to be an election on the 4th of July?
I didn't know until I put the news on and I saw Rishi Sunak getting drenched on, and they say there's no God. It was absolutely hilarious, and I love it. I love elections. I love all the political plotting, and I love all the intrigue and all the little small battles. I mean, there's a big battle, which is Labour and the Tories in London, and the SNP and Labour and Tories. But actually, I like all the little personal rivalries and battles. I'm really looking forward to. There could be a Tory leadership battle coming up if Sunak, loses. He could go. We've got that to look forward to. We've got Jeremy Corbyn possibly standing in Islington North against the official Labour Party. All these little dramas playing out. I think it's brilliant. It's Christmas come early.
Christmas come early for you. How did you first hear about it on Wednesday, Martin?
Well, I saw the kind of social media stuff that was going on as these rumours, and they're not being denied. And this is the first time these are not being denied. And I was kind of, in a funny kind of way, wasn't that surprised, because I just thought if you roll this up as basically to the last minute. And I never thought January was very likely because, who's going to be campaigning through Christmas and right in the middle of winter?
I think most people thought it was going to be the autumn.
So it's going to be November-ish. And it's, well, if you are the Prime Minister and the only thing you can do is, the thing you've got control over is choosing the date of the election. Every week that goes by in the autumn, you are getting less and less autonomy for you as the Prime Minister to make this choice. Whereas you do it now. Great. I mean, it's the one thing he can do is to catch everybody out and catch everybody by surprise, including his entire party, which I just think is really funny. And I cannot think of any situation where this has happened before. I've been around quite a long time, where he did not consult his cabinet before he went to the King. It was entirely, I assume some advisors were involved in it, and maybe his wife, I don't know. But he made this decision without consulting with anybody in his party. And apparently so many of these backbenchers are absolutely furious. And there's Michael Gove this morning, Andrea led some, or last night rather, not going to stand. There's a kind of
over
chaos
70
about
not going
this.
to stand from the Conservatives.
Dominic Raab isn't either.
Pardon?
Dominic Raab isn't either.
Yeah,
that was a while back that he announced he wouldn't stand.
So we're now nearly 80 Conservative MPs who are not standing, and apparently it's worth thousands of votes because you're known in a constituency as a standing MP gives you thousands of votes advantage before you start, just because people recognise you or you might have helped them out with personal business in the constituency. So that's a huge issue as well. But just the thought that the Prime Minister went, no, this is when I'm going to go for this for whatever reasons, I think is absolutely hilarious. I also think it's really interesting that he has decided very clearly to make this a presidential thing, where it's Sunak versus Starmer. And there's going to be much more focus. Maybe that's why he didn't consult the cabinet, because maybe they won't have much role to play. It's all going to be about him.
And Starmer's his opening stall was indoors with the union flags.
A lovely
beside
roof,
him.
yes. lovely roof, some central heating, and everyone was dry. I think it is a really, really interesting election. And I think it's really interesting because, ironically, because that was playing in the background, I think for Sunak, things can only get better. I think this is just such a dreadful start. The next day, where does he go? I've got to improve on this. He goes to the Titanic Quarter of Belfast. You know, it's like, what are you thinking of? Who is advising you on where you're going to make these statements and where you're going to make it? His personal ratings are lower than Jeremy Corbyn's was at the start of the last election. So
well, he'll say it's early days.
I think he's given up. I think he'd underestimate these sort of transnational billionaires, how little they care about this kind of thing. We're not, I mean, he's going to get some big job in the United States. So if he has this election in July and he is going to lose, he will end up in the United States in time for the new school term for his kids. I think being Prime Minister for him was just something else that he could do on this, in the way that being Prime Minister for David Cameron was just something he could do because it's what people from his class did. At least with Boris Johnson, I cannot believe I'm actually saying something to defend Boris Johnson. He wanted the job. He didn't want to do the job, but he wanted to say that he was in the job. And I think Sunak just kind of did it because it was there, and it's just not been fun, and he's not been very good at it. So he's going to go off and do something else.
What did you think of Keir Starmer's speech?
I think the thing with Keir Starmer is that it's not exactly Tony Blair. He's not exactly inspiring, but whether he likes it or not, Starmer does seem to actually get things done. The problem is if Starmer's majority is too big, they're all going to fall out with each other by about 4 hours after the election's over. And this is going to be one of the problems, I think, with Labour, is he's actually running a genuine risk of the party being too big. Because if you look at how big the support is, the smaller the opposition, the more likely they all are to fall out with each other. And nobody can fall out with each other like the Labour Party can fall out with each other.
What about John Swinney's comments that it's disrespectful to Scotland because lots of us, may well be away on holiday. There's the Euros going on.
Well, I just kind of think that this is an assumption that most of them could find Scotland on a map. I mean, I don't really think they're altogether sure even where it is, even now. So I'm kind of not really sure about this idea of it being disrespectful, because being disrespectful would mean having to recognise that we exist. I am sure that nobody at any point even thought for a second that it was the school holidays were on in Scotland and it's the major holiday season and a large proportion of Scottish people living in Scotland will be away on holiday. I do not think any of his advisors even knew that. So I think to imply an active act of disrespect is a bit optimistic.
Yeah, and I think also May and June are times when older people go on holidays to, in the rest of the UK to avoid the school holidays because it's always much cheaper. So given the older demographic is a key thing for both parties, but certainly for the Conservative Party, that kind of doesn't make much sense at all either.
There are postal votes nowadays.
I know they've invented.
Do you think it will it'll affect turnout?
I think it will. I think turnout is a bit of an issue here anyway, because I think there isn't that huge enthusiasm for the Labour Party. But I think they have focused on the key thing, which is I think people really do want change and really want things to happen.
July the 4th is a gift. I mean, for the SNP, July the 4th is a gift. Independence Day in the United States. I mean, come on.
Well, you mentioned that there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm, Martin. On Thursday's BBC Radio Scotland phone in, Stephen Jardine was hearing from listeners who said they felt politically homeless at the moment and didn't know which way to turn, including this caller, William.
I would describe myself as politically homeless. I don't feel that any of the parties represent me and what I would regard as a priority.
Yeah, the word scunnered came up a lot in that phone, and Sergio, I think people are very disenchanted with politicians generally as a whole.
For the first time in a long time, I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to vote, because I can't vote Tory, obviously. I cannot think of a less inspiring figure than Keir Starmer. And with the SNP in its current state, they still have to prove, to me anyway, that they've overcome their difficulties of the past few years. And I'm left thinking, well, who's left for me to vote for? And it's a very unusual situation, because usually I'm pretty definite as to who I'm going to vote for right from the start. It's very unusual for me to feel that way, and I think a lot of people are the same.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. And I think in Scotland too, it's very difficult. It'd be very difficult for the SNP to frame this as a narrative as being about independence. Obviously, that's going to be a key task for them. But I think it is really difficult to frame that narrative, because this is about change at a UK level, and. I mean, it will be really interesting. I think you just make no assumptions in these things. I mean, I think this is unlikely to happen, but I do remember at the start of the campaign of John Major's first election, everybody went, this is absolutely hopeless. And John Major was in that same position that Sunak is in right at this moment, that he was what they call the loser narrative, that he was going to be the one that lost. And I remember him doing things that I thought were so corny and ridiculous. I thought, no one will fall for that. When he took his little soapbox out and he stood up in front of people in shopping centres and so on. He's like, this is what politics is about. And I mean, there were other factors involved in it, but he won, to everybody's absolute astonishment. Now, I don't think this will happen this time, because the lead is so large. But I think the next narrative, which the Conservatives are going to fall back on, is going to be, think about the opposition. It's kind of the mirror image of what Rachel was saying, is that if you let a party have too much power, then things will go badly wrong. So you need to vote for us just to get enough of us into Parliament so that we can have some kind of opposition. Because as it stands with the numbers, they'll be almost wiped out.
Well, we're going to move on, but before we do, I just wanted to ask about this, because First Minister John Swinney has announced that he will not support a parliamentary committee's recommendation to ban Michael Matheson from Holyrood for 27 sitting days. It came shortly after Holyrood's Standards Committee said it was recommending that Mr Matheson be suspended for racking up an £11,000 bill on his parliamentary iPad while he was on holiday. The charges, which were initially paid out of the public purse, were incurred during a family trip to Morocco in late 2022. Mr Matheson said he'd used the iPad solely for constituency work while on holiday, but later told Parliament his sons had used it as a Wi-Fi hotspot to watch a Rangers versus Celtic football match. Michael Matheson had this to say.
I acknowledge the recommendations that the committee have made. I think it's pretty clear, though, that the process has become highly politicised, which has compromised the process and the fairness of the process. I also think that the sanctions which they have proposed are excessive and that they are unfair.
Excessive, unfair?
Well, I actually agree with a lot of what Matheson says and a lot of what John Swinney said about it, but I think they should have just kept their mouths shut and got on with it, because he gets to keep his job, which, given all the circumstances, I think he should be content with. I think they'd been a lot smarter just saying, fine, that's it, over and done with, let's move on, instead of giving it more oxygen and more, we're talking about it today. We shouldn't be talking about this today, and yet here we are. And that's because, John Swinney said he wasn't going to support it.
And the Scottish Conservatives are calling for him to resign. They will be calling for him to resign next week.
Yes. However, if this had happened to an MP, his constituents would have had the ability to call for him to be recalled, and that doesn't apply in this case.
The words expenses scandal are not words that you want to have running through an election, and that's what's happened here. They've allowed that to happen. Take his punishment like a man or like a person, and just shut up about it. And John Swinney, who I admire a lot, should not be supporting him. He should just let this go. Loyalty is no place in politics.
I think it is really over the top. At the same time, I do agree with...
What, you mean the sanction?
I think the sanction is over the top, but I do agree with both Sergio and Martin. I think he just should have kept his mouth shut. There's an election on and he's still got his job. I think the Conservatives calling for the resignation, given the absolute mess and the corruption scandals that their own party's involved in Westminster, I just don't think anybody should really listen to the Scottish Tories about this kind of thing. But I do think that the punishment was slightly over the top. I think he just should have taken it and swallowed it. He's still got a job.
Okay.
And everybody needs to learn about roaming and roaming charges. Everybody needs to learn about this.
Well, I think he's learned the hard way. And still to come, tears at the post office inquiry and Chef Heston's call for more employers to embrace neurodivergent employees. Now to olive oil.
Oh, Popeye. You're really my knight.
tree to the olive to its oil, and from the oil to Olivia.
Yes, how much olive oil do you use? Is it a case of splash it all over or use sparingly where flavour really matters? I'm asking because of a study into the price of the oil, with reports suggesting the average cost of a half-litre bottle has surged from £3.50 in 2021 to nearly £7.50 today. One food writer says it's now a luxury item, and others are questioning whether we need to reconsider how readily we reach for it. So the obvious person to start on this discussion is the Italian and therefore virgin olive oil expert,
Yes.
Sergio.
Well, I have very strongly held views about olive oil based on very little knowledge.
That's why we have you here generally.
I think olive oil it has an almost spiritual connection. It's not just any other oil. I mean, there's olive oil and then there's all the other oils. It's what butter is to margarine, olive oil is to every other oil. I love it. But although I got shocked by the price rise, once I looked into it, I thought, you buy a bottle of wine for £7 or £8, and it's, gone in an evening. You're paying the same for...
Speak for yourself, Sergio.
Well,
£7 or £8 were you buying now?
Well, whatever. what I'm saying is olive oil, if olive oil costs the same as a bog standard bottle of red wine, and thousands of olives go into every litre, did you know that? Thousands of olives go into every litre. I don't think spending £8, £9 or £10 for a litre of olive oil is excessive. It's shocking to us because a couple of years ago we were spending half that. It's worth it.
Do you remember the days when I was 16, had a Saturday job in a chemist in Paisley, and the Italians would come in every week to buy their olive oil because it was the only place you could buy olive oil.
Yes,
it was chemists back then.
I remember my friends, because we used to go to, there was a place called Fatsy's in Clyde Street. I don't think that particular Fatsy's
in Glasgow.
Yeah, in Glasgow, and they used to sell a big 5 litre, I think it was, tins of olive oil. So we always had olive oil all the time, and I never realised it was until some of my friends said no, they had olive oil, but it was in these tiny little bottles in the bathroom, and they used to put it in their ears. And I thought this was a very odd way to behave, sticking olive oil in your ears. Yeah, so what were we talking about?
Sorry, I just interrupted you with a memory of the past.
Right, that's right. But it was very common among my Scottish friends. They didn't use it in their cooking at all.
Well, it wasn't until the 90s, I think, Rachel. Wasn't it sort of River Cafe and Jamie Oliver, Nigella, that made olive oil a thing in our cooking?
I have to say, I don't know, because I wasn't here in the 90s.
Right. Well, I think I'd bought all those books, and you started to see those oils in the supermarkets.
I genuinely thought you saw it before, but then I left here when I was 19, so I'm kind of very confused. But the problem is that olive oil has just become so much more expensive in Spain and Italy and Greece. I mean, someone was saying
it's partly because of the climate.
It's really all because of the climate. Basically, what's happening is the summers there are so hot and so dry that the trees are not producing, or they're producing like about 40% of the olives that they normally do. And the problem with olive oil is not like wine, it doesn't improve with age. So if you're finding cheap olive oil in the supermarket, what you're getting is really old olive oil.
I see.
You can really tell the difference in the smell, because what you used to get in Spain was people that knew somebody in a village. There'd be a cooperative and you'd basically buy like big 5 litre bottles of extra virgin olive oil, and they wouldn't use light olive oil. They would only use extra virgin because that was the only thing that the cooperative did. And that has become in the past 30 years in general more of a luxury product everywhere, not just here.
Do you think we're overusing it?
I don't think it's possible to overuse it. I do.
So there's no better substitute?
Not for Mediterranean cooking. I mean, I think if you're doing Indian cooking or if you're doing Chinese cooking, you're looking for an oil that doesn't smell or taste so much. So but then sunflower seed oil's not a brilliant oil. Rapeseed oil's not a great oil. You really need to look for something like groundnut oil, peanut oil, that doesn't have a lot of smell. What you want with a lot of Chinese cooking is you want to put sesame oil in at the end. But there is a thing, I mean, olive oil is kind of the cradle of Western civilization. It's a massive, massive thing in the Mediterranean, and we have really adopted a lot of Mediterranean food traditions. And you can't replace olive oil even with butter. You can't replace olive oil with anything other than olive oil. So
what would you be prepared to pay? Quickly, and we'll have to move on.
I think if it's €13 a litre in Greece, then I have to pay that, don't I?
€13 a litre. Oof. Right, well, expensive tastes. Well, let's talk now about the Post Office Horizon scandal, and much focus on it this week as the former boss, Paula Venables, appeared in front of the inquiry, breaking her almost decade-long silence. She was quizzed over the course of 3 days on how things unfolded during her time at the head of the organisation by both the counsel to the public inquiry and lawyers speaking on behalf of sub-postmasters. On her first day of evidence, she broke down in tears.
I fully accept now that the Post Office, the Post Office knew that. I completely accepted. Personally, I didn't know that, and I'm incredibly sorry that that happened to those people and to so many others.
Well, according to her 775-page witness statement, she wasn't being given the information and documents she needed to find out the truth about the Horizon IT system. Mr. Beer wasn't impressed and asked her, "Do you think you're the unluckiest CEO in history?" Ms. Venables says the problem was, "I was too trusting." Well, Channel 4 News was watching the coverage along with some former sub-postmasters.
Looking on across the country this week, the victims.
I can't understand how she's lost her way. And quite honestly, I find this utterly contemptible, the way she sits there acting like the wounded soldier, when in actual fact she was the Commander-in-Chief.
I absolutely loved my post office, sorry. I loved my post office branch so much. We know the difference between right and wrong. These people don't. Post Office Limited don't know the difference between right and wrong. Simple as.
Well, on her final day of evidence yesterday, Venables faced questions from several lawyers representing sub-postmasters who did not hold back. She was accused of living in La La Land and broke down in tears again, saying she worked as hard as she could to deliver the best post office for the UK.
The risk was too great. Looking under that rock, you're going to find a problem. It's going to devastate the post office, ruin it. You couldn't let that happen, could you, Miss Venables?
I loved the post office. I gave it... I worked as hard as I possibly could to deliver the best post office for the UK. It would have been wonderful to have 30,000 post office branches. That would have been the best outcome ever, to have had more post offices in more communities. What I failed to do, and I have made this clear previously, is I did not recognise and it's been discussed across the inquiry, the imbalance of power between the institution and the individual, and I let these people down.
Well, there was a long pause there for tears, which was actually even longer than what we played there. We have edited it for radio. This is the first time that we've heard from her since 2015. What did you think of the way she handled herself?
Well, I find it difficult to listen to a lot of this because my father for a while was a sub-postmaster, and he was long finished with this before any of this happened. But you can't listen to any of the outcomes for and I don't like using the word victims either, but the people who were on the receiving end of the post office and their tactics here. You can't listen to their testimony without projecting my father into it and thinking how he would have reacted and this kind of situations he might have found himself in. And I find it really difficult to listen to this, and her tactics of, crying, apologising, I can't remember, it was somebody else's fault, and then you cry again. And that was her tactics. And the trouble with these inquiries is that they expose the detail of it, which is quite emotional and quite difficult. So, for example, the fact that when she was confronted with the knowledge that one of the sub-postmasters had taken their own lives, her reaction was to see if there were any other contributing factors that might have led to that suicide. Now, for me, that's not the tactics of someone who's defending their organisation. that's a bad person. That's somebody who is lacking some kind of moral core. If that's your first response, you might think that through your head, but then to say it in a meeting or to put it into an email, that is a bad person. There's something, to me, quite wicked at the centre of this. And the interesting psychological thing here, of course, is the fact that she's an ordained minister of the Church of England, that she was once in line, or she was certainly on the list of recommendations to be Bishop of London. And so what's going on in her head and how she reconciles this is really fascinating in a really dark way. I'm beginning to think these public inquiries are not really worth what they do. I don't think we do learn lessons from them.
Really?
I don't. I'm not convinced. I used to be great. I used to think it's really important to get these things out into the open and have a public debate and have public transparency around these things. I now think that you should construct a criminal case against people and take them to court, to a much more kind of American approach where you don't mess about with public inquiries. You put people with the evidence and they're held accountable. The trouble is here, she is going to be the most hated person in Britain for a couple of weeks. Then we'll kind of forget about it and there'll be somebody else we can hate.
But the problem is these are the kind of people that we promote. I mean, these are the kind of people that get these jobs. I mean, you know, everybody seems to be shocked about her first reaction to this is to protect her brand, but that's what she was there for. That's who we promote. That's who we give all the money to. People who know how to protect brands. That's the thing I find fascinating personally about all of this is what has happened to Fujitsu. Like, who's been prosecuted in Fujitsu for basically selling an extremely shoddy piece of computing equipment and then telling everybody that it worked absolutely fine and was stronger than Fort Knox? That's the thing that gets to me, and I completely agree with Martin. I think we need criminal prosecutions. I think public inquiries. I think they've had their day. I think they're 19th century solutions to 21st century problems, and I think we have a massive problem with management about the kind of people that we put in these positions.
Okay, and obviously
what we look for.
We'll be talking about the infected blood inquiry after the news as well. Another, the devastated lives. But Sergio, you're on the post office.
I agree completely with what Rachel's saying there. The thing is, Paula Venables, she's become this hate figure. She's a team player. She was doing what the team wanted her to do. When she communicated with her colleagues and her bosses and whatever, she wasn't trying to hide what she was doing. They knew what she was doing. That's why she was employed. The problem is not her, although I'm sure she has many problems. The problem is the system which puts somebody like her in charge with the express intention of maximising profit, maximising PR.
But the danger often people say is when you say something systemic, nobody's held to account.
Oh, no, I think hold lots of individuals to account.
Okay.
Yes,
well,
but the difficulty is that if it's just about the system, then it's just about the system, and that's the problem.
Okay.
But management,
there's lots of companies.
Management is a huge problem, and the way people are put in positions of power is a massive problem in this country.
Yeah, but lots of people run companies, and they don't run them this way.
We have to leave that there, but the inquiry still has more evidence to hear, and it's for the inquiry chair to decide how compelling Paula Venables' evidence was.
What is the price for freedom? The Great American Bash 1988, The Price for Freedom, is a battleground where champions defend their titles at all costs, and the bloodthirsty contenders grapple for glory. Two living legends fight for their careers as Ric Flair takes on Lex Luger and Dusty Rhodes goes against U.S. heavyweight champion Barry Windham. Also featuring the first ever Triple Cage Tower of Doom match where 10 men struggle in a one-of-a-kind clash for honor. Plus, a 10 lashes to the loser tag team title match pitting the Fantastics against the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette in a straitjacket above the ring. And power meets power as Nikita Koloff and Sting tag up against the champions Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson. In a country where freedom is everything, the Great American Bash 1988, The Price for Freedom, is an event you can't afford to miss.
Coming up after us on Radio Scotland at 11:30, it's the good, the bad and the unexpected. Mark Nelson's guests this week include Midge Ure and Betty Boo. At 12, it's Off the Ball with Stuart and Tam with all the big match build-up. And at 1:30, Sports Sound, you can find out who will lift football's oldest prize with Celtic versus Rangers in the Scottish Cup final. At 7 o'clock, Gary Innes returns with Take the Floor with the very best in traditional music and the first session from a brand new band, the Nicola Braid and Gordon Haddo Quartet. And at 10 o'clock tonight, Billy Sloan has new records from Kevin McDermott, Horst MacDonald and Travis. With my guests Rachel McCormick, Sergio Casci and Martin Raymond. Now we were talking olive oil earlier. This texter has got in touch on 80295 to say, thank goodness my partner is Italian-Scottish and we get olive oil from the same olive groves the family have had for 100 years. A big saving, clearly. So well worth a drive over there every year. I am so jealous. Well, sticking with food, let's talk about the chef Heston Blumenthal, who this week revealed that he was recently diagnosed as bipolar. He believes the condition, along with a prior diagnosis of ADHD, helped him achieve the success that he has. He even calls it his superpower.
The diagnosis is the potential for superhero or doom and gloom. We're the superstars that will be the last people to be replaced by computers.
Well, this week he also said that he believes more needs to be done to welcome neurodivergent individuals in the workplace, saying these are individuals who may have exceptional skills and unparalleled abilities, yet because of traditional ways of working, we're missing out on the brilliance they can bring. Do you believe in that employers could? Do you believe that, Martin, that employers could be doing more?
Oh, I definitely do. Yeah, I mean, I think he's got a point here that diversity of all types in the workplace is a good thing. But my feeling is, good luck with that. Good luck with that. I mean, on the huge spectrum of mental health and mental illness and mental disabilities. You know, we've got government ministers a couple of weeks ago saying, you know, pull yourselves together, get back into work. It's you're shirking, you people who say that you've got some kind of mental problems. Get back to the workplace. And the accommodations that workplaces make are not universal, to say the least.
Rachel, you have an example of accommodations that a workplace has made for a neurodivergent person. Someone you know, is that right?
Yes, my friend Jose runs a cafe in Mexico City, and he has two employees that do his front of house, and one of them is autistic, and his issue, he said to Jose, was that he couldn't get a job, so he couldn't get any experience, and he said that actually working with him has been very easy. It's just you just have to get used to the way that he is, and you have to be very clear and very specific in your instructions. But once he gets it, he's absolutely fine. And he said his clients know that this boy is neurodivergent. They can tell that he's not a very typical smiley, kind of happy, very kind of like really interested in service culture, but he's done really well, and they're all really happy working with him. Yeah. He's very reliable.
We need to make more awareness. We're back after 11 with more apologies and promises of compensation for the victims of the infected blood scandal, the new Beach Boys documentary that goes behind the California dream, and have British sitcoms stop being laugh out loud funny. Hello again. You're listening to Saturday Mornings on BBC Radio Scotland. Me, Shereen Nanjiani, and my guests, food and drink writer Rachel McCormick, screenwriter Sergio Casci, and Martin Raymond of Cloudline PR. And coming up in the last half hour of the show, apologies and a promise of compensation for those whose lives were devastated by the infected blood scandal. Also, we look back at the life and achievements of Scottish swimming icon David Wilkie, who died this week. And has this classic British sitcom format used in the likes of Only Fools and Horses and Fawlty Towers become a thing of the past? The BBC's comedy boss has vowed to make more shows with laugh-out-loud gags. What was the last comedy show that made you laugh out loud? Text me on 80295. Richard in Falkirk says, I laughed out loud last night at Outnumbered. Very funny and amazing to see the three children growing up. Believe there is to be a Christmas special in which the parents live in the empty nest and the adult Waynes come home. Bring it on. Yes, that is coming out this Christmas. This texter says, the only sitcoms I laughed out loud at were on the radio. Milton Jones, I do love a pun, Ed Reardon's Week, and the Stanley Baxter Playhouse. Yes, well, get in touch with your thoughts on that or anything else we're talking about this morning. Text to 80295 or charge at your standard message rate, or you can use the hashtag Shereen on social media. Now, we're going to talk about the Beach Boys. There have been hugely successful rockumentaries over the years, from the early efforts in the 80s that spawned the spoof Spinal Tap to the altogether more polished modern efforts on bands like Fleetwood Mac and the Beatles. Well, this week it was the turn of the Beach Boys as Disney Plus uncover what they call a celebration of the legendary band that revolutionised pop music and the iconic, harmonious sound they created that personified the California dream. But it wasn't all sunshine and surfing.
Try it one more time from the top. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys just represented some sort of fantasy.
They were participating in the creation of a California dream.
Man, they made me want to go to where they had cars and girls in bikinis and sun.
Their music takes you someplace.
There's definitely been ups and downs. We've probably been counted out half a dozen times.
We used to sing three-part harmony in the backseat of the car, and that's the birth of three brothers singing together.
Round, round, get around, I get around, yeah.
Three brothers, Brian, Dennis, and Carl, a cousin, Mike Love, and our good friend, El Jardine. That's family to me.
We've known each other for a really long time, and there really is a great deal of fellowship in the group, and we've been turned off a lot.
We ended up, it's kind of like a rivalry.
The Beatles, bring them on. Here are the Beach Boys.
Brian was really learning to be a producer.
That's when we started realizing there's some genius here.
But his dad began to be an obstacle.
Brian, I'm a genius too. Let's go, huh?
My Uncle Murray sold to the publishing.
And Brian went, you sold my songs?
So that gives you a flavour of the new 2-hour documentary. Brian Wilson now has dementia, so you know this is kind of the last time you will see him speaking, looking back on that era, which is quite sad. But what did you think of it?
Well, I'm not a fan of the Beach Boys. I don't know. I mean, I was too young first time round, and the kind of second time round, I don't know. Growing up in Calendar in the rain, just the California stuff seemed just like too much of a reach. So I'm never a fan. But actually, that's why I quite enjoyed this, because I didn't know all the stories. You know, if you're a fan, you know all the background stuff. But I didn't really know very much about them, you know, apart from the drugs and the mental health issues and so on. So I find a lot of this really quite interesting. I mean, their father... I mean, in the great catalogue of terrible fathers and
abusive fathers,
he's right at the very top end of everything. And also their kind of connection with Charles Manson and his gang too. Apparently, in the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Brad Pitt drives down Sunset Boulevard and picks up a member of the Manson gang. Well, apparently that's exactly what Dennis Wilson did. He was driving down Sunset Boulevard, picked up this girl, and that was their connection then with the Manson family. And
he never quite
Sharon Tate
forgave
murder.
himself for that.
Well, quite right too, to be honest. So I love these documentaries because they show you something of the sheer boredom as well that's involved in producing perfection. You know, the fact that these kids sat in their bedrooms, in their basement, when other kids were outside playing football and out in the sun, and they sat there learning to do harmonies and to play their instruments, and then the painstaking construction of these 2-3 minute songs. I love all that stuff. So that's all in here.
It's a historical piece, and it also pictures the slight rivalry that there was between them and the Beatles.
The Beatles, imagine thinking you were rivals to the Beatles.
I know.
It's hilarious.
So you think it might appeal to people even if they weren't interested in the Beach Boys?
Yes, I do, and I think there's enough social and historical context in there about their times and how they fitted the times, and then suddenly they didn't fit in with the times.
Okay, well, the Beach Boys has just launched on Disney Plus. And if the Beach Boys didn't get us that excited, it didn't get the other two that excited. Let's squeeze in another bit of TV that might fare better. One reviewer called it the absolute zenith of true crime TV. You might already be familiar with the news story it focuses on, which unfolded over the past few years, of the American citizen suspected of faking his own death and hiding out here in Scotland. In January, he was extradited back to the US after court ruled that the man who claimed to be an Irish orphan named Arthur Knight was actually registered sex offender Nicholas Rossi. The 36-year-old was caught while being treated for COVID when he was arrested at a hospital in Glasgow in December 2021. You remember it now. And this week, he's the subject of Channel 4's Imposter, the man who came back from the dead. Let's get a flavour. Here's an extract featuring an interview with his wife, Miranda Knight.
It makes me feel like I want to hide away, because it's just the most surreal, bizarre statement to hear about your husband. You get married and everything is a fairy tale, and then you're in this situation which is not a fairy tale anymore. The person that I know and love is not that person.
Well, as I said, Sergio, we especially in Scotland will be familiar with the story from seeing the news stories of this very strange man. But this brings a lot of background to the story and goes, right back to his childhood. Tell us a bit more about what you see and how it's done.
I didn't follow the story that closely. I remember seeing him on TV, and he's a striking figure, like a cross between Winston Churchill and Dr. Strangelove. He's sitting in a wheelchair that apparently doesn't need. He's got an oxygen mask permanently in front on his face, which again, according to doctors, apparently didn't need. But it did mean that you couldn't look at him and say, "Hold on, I know that guy. That's what's his name, Rossi." The fascinating thing about him is he lies so shamelessly and so easily. And I think that generally human beings we're sort of programmed to believe each other. That's how we get through life. So when somebody is able to lie with complete ease, I think they can get quite far before they're caught. And that was, to me, one of the fascinating things about this, is that he just managed to go on and on and on without ever being caught, until in the end he was struck low by COVID, I believe, and he woke up from a coma to find the police standing over him and saying, is your name, what was it again? What was his first name? Nicholas Rossi, but he called himself Arthur Knight. Well, it only struck me towards the end of the show that name was probably chosen because of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Did that strike you, Arthur Knight? You're picking a name which is so
he still claims to be Arthur Knight. What did you?
I find that idea of my thing about Arthur Knight is, how do you get all that identification? Because the amount of work that you have to go through nowadays to change all your ID, that you can legally get married, you can legally live in a country. The story I find fascinating. And
tell us a bit about the background to the story that we found out, from his earlier life.
I mean, basically what they said is he was in a children's home in Rhode Island, and he's wanted on various sexual assault charges in the States, and that he ran away to the UK. He apparently came to the UK via a woman he met online, and he basically moved into her house, absolutely terrified her.
And we have an interview with her in the show.
We have an interview of her. She accuses him of raping her as well, and she phoned the police. And I found about her in the documentary was she expected the police to laugh at her, kind of, what did you expect to happen when you had this stranger into your house? Because again, she felt shame. He obviously felt none, and the police said to her, no, put his suitcases in the police station and change the locks of your door and do not let him anywhere near you ever again. And I found the story absolutely fascinating, but I found the way that it was told is just, it's not really moved on since the successful podcasts of true. The very first one was Serial. There's like The Psychiatrist Next Door. They've basically used exactly the same format
with captions saying the politician, attorney.
They've used some captions to make something that's actually very serious. I mean, the woman he's attacked, the woman that he's abused, that his wife, their lives have been ruined. And I find that the way that everything was being told of isn't this entertaining and lurid.
Okay, this is a 4-parter. Do you find it a bit lurid?
No, and I found it so compelling. I watched the whole thing. I watched the whole 4 parts.
So what was compelling about it, and not, because that's always a concern of mine with true crime is that does it become a bit voyeuristic?
I hate true crime documentaries as much as I love music documentaries. I hate true crime documentaries for that very reason. I think there's victims. There's and these are all very recent, in historic terms. So the victims. But what I quite liked about it was that the victims were right at the centre of this, and their stories were right at the centre of it. I thought they were very brave. I also thought the journalists involved in this were actually pretty brave too. I know journalists are quite tough characters, I know that, but they were very brave because he is a very dangerous person, and he went after one of the attorneys in America who tried to bring charges against him and made up all these kind of lurid stories about him. So he comes after you. But the way the story was told was really good. The twists and the turns in this narrative are amazing. I thought it was really worth sticking with 4 hours of my life. And I actually thought, I disagree slightly with Rachel, because I thought they really captured the sense of the geographical spread of this story, and the way the kind of restlessness of the American continent, that he could move from state to state and hide himself, and then move to Britain and hide himself. I thought they captured all of that really well. Right.
Well, all 4 episodes of Channel 4's Imposter, The Man Who Came Back from the Dead, are available on Channel 4's platform. And still to come, we'll look back at the life and sporting career of one of the greats, Scotland's gold medal swimmer, David Wilkie. Plus, have sitcoms lost their way, and do they need more laughs? Let us know the last time you laughed out loud at a sitcom. Louise in Glasgow has texted 80295. She says, Colin from Accounts had us in tears laughing, looking forward to series 2. This texter says, I just love Mandy, starring Diane Morgan. I've only just discovered it on iPlayer. Laugh out loud funny. Marion says, nothing better than 2 Doors Down. Absolutely hilarious. Anne-Marie in Edinburgh, I'm catching up on a show called Trying on Apple TV before the new series starts. It's making me laugh out loud. When did you last laugh at a sitcom? You can text me on 80295. And an interesting discussion on some of those things I might not have described as a classic sitcom format, more comedy dramas. So what is the difference in our tastes changing in that sense? But now to the public inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal, which after years of harrowing evidence released its conclusions and recommendations on Monday. More than 30,000 people in the UK were infected with HIV and hepatitis C after being given contaminated blood products in the 70s and 80s. Many lives were devastated. The inquiry's chairman, Sir Brian Langstaff, pulled no punches. He said, this disaster was not an accident. People put their faith in doctors and government to keep them safe, and their trust was betrayed. The Prime Minister said the government would pay whatever it costs. The government's published a document setting out the amounts that individuals can expect to get, with a total cost of compensation expected to run into billions. A person infected with HIV, for example, can expect to receive compensation of between £2.2 million and £2.6 million. Well, Ewan McDougall was just 16 when he died from AIDS in 1994. That was after being infected with HIV by blood products used to treat haemophilia under the care of doctors at York Hill Children's Hospital in Glasgow. His mum, Kate, died earlier this year, exactly 30 years after her son. According to her ex-husband, John, she is another victim of the scandal, as she never got over her unwitting role in causing Ewan's illness.
One of these injections, maybe more than one of those injections, probably lots of those injections were infected with HIV, probably lots of them. And the mother knows that, and the son knows that as well, that, you know, that the mother injected that into the son. If I don't tell her story, then nobody will.
Yeah, and so many harrowing stories like that have come out of this, Martin. It's just horrific. I mean, post office, horrific, the human cost. This, just, I can't imagine the human cost.
Yeah, I think there is a case to be made for this, of all the scandals that we've had and inquiries into scandals, and, you know, Windrush, Grenfell, Hillsborough. You could make a case that this is by far the worst, and just in terms of the number of people it reached and the number of deaths that came from this. And, you know, there are sort of technical issues, if you like. It's horrible to use that word, but technical issues about how this could have been avoided and how blood products could have been heat treated, and at what point people knew and at what point then they could have taken action. But I think underlying a lot of this, again, it's a bit like the post office scandal again, is the attitudes of officials and of doctors towards citizens, towards the people that they were supposed to be helping, where they become almost the enemy. And when you read things in email and records where people say, oh, we've got to watch this particular official, he's becoming too sympathetic to the victims. And you think, what is going on in these institutions? You know, it's not just commercial companies where you get this kind of this kind of attitude where the people who you are there to serve become the enemy, become hostile. They're like a hostile enemy, and you have to defend yourself against them. And I just find this really disturbing, you know, the last 30, 40 years or so. This is far too late. I mean, this is now happening. Most of the people who were implicated in the problems involved in this are now dead. I mean, I feel a certain personal connection to this. I worked in what we used to call health education, and I was responsible for messages and information around HIV and AIDS for a number of years. And I remember we used to list people at risk, and under the people at risk there were people who were having unprotected sex, people who were injecting drugs, and haemophiliacs. And I just look back at that now and I kind of shudder. It's like, to what extent were people with haemophilia and other blood conditions, to what extent were they in any way in control of the risk that they ran? Because they had to trust what doctors and officials told them. And I think it's that betrayal of trust. We knew, I went to global AIDS conferences, and we knew that there was a huge risk, particularly with American blood products, because of the way that the blood was collected. But it wasn't just foreign blood, it was also in Scotland, where prisoners' blood was routinely used. I think that is an important point, actually. That I think York Hill used American imported blood, but you know it was a difference.
Right.
Sergio,
you know, as with all these cases, Alison Pearson wrote a coruscating, is that a word? Coruscating article in the Telegraph, and she was saying there's a litany of cases. You know, there was the Grenfell Tower Block fire, the post office scandal, the Windrush affair, this contaminated blood scandal, and she said the common thing is that the authorities behaved as if ordinary members of the public simply didn't matter, or certainly didn't matter enough to tell them the truth. And you think to yourself, there's a common denominator to all these things, which goes beyond the individuals involved. And as we were saying before, the French attitude towards it was criminal prosecutions.
20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago they acted fast. People ended up in jail. And I'm wondering if you know, Martin was right about, you know, the public inquiries are all well and good. Let's put people in jail. Let's put them behind bars. They'll concentrate their minds wonderfully.
Well, certainly there is a commitment that they will be compensated and quickly.
New crime drama on BBC iPlayer.
I'm Detective Sergeant Rebus. Rebus?
There's rules and there's laws, right? The law is whatever society says it is at any given point. But the rules are the rules. Blood is thicker than water. Don't grass on your friends. An eye for an eye.
You tried to kill me, Rebus.
Criminals follow the rules. Sometimes they need a reminder that the police know the rules too.
Rebus. Watch all episodes on BBC iPlayer.
Hey, listen up. I got news for you. Tuesday night, right after Happy Days, you're invited to meet Laverne and Shirley.
That's us. I'm Shirley. This is Laverne. Of course that's us. Who do you think they think we were? Doris Day and Sandra Dee? Don't start, Laverne. We're on national television.
Whoa, Laverne and Shirley. I'll be there too, because I'm their guest star. And listen, I want you to watch because they're very close friends of mine. How close? Girls?
Premiering Tuesday at 8:30, 7:30 Central on ABC.
And if you haven't dipped into Rebus yet, you can find out what our guests made of it on last Saturday's show. Look us up on BBC Sounds. And if you're not already listening live on BBC Sounds, why not make the switch? Then you can pause when the doorbell goes and pick up again when you're ready. Just saying.
What's getting you talking? This is Shereen on BBC Radio Scotland.
With my guests Rachel McCormick, Sergio Casci and Martin Raymond. More laugh-out-loud sitcoms. Bob and Cumbernauld says, with the exception of Have I Got News For You, I don't laugh out loud at anything. But last night I did at the Irish sitcom Young Offenders. This texter says, Loudermilk on Netflix makes me laugh out loud, as does BBC's Dinosaur with Ashley Storey. Now, to the Olympic swimming champion David Wilkie, who died this week at the age of 70. As well as 2 Olympic silver medals and 3 world titles, the Scot most memorably won the 200-metre breaststroke gold in Montreal in 1976.
David Wilkie is absolutely superb. Look at him go. He's now got a lead of 2 metres over Hinkin, and Great Britain is going to win its first gold medal in swimming since 1960, when Anita Longsborough won the 200. And it's Wilkie! And it's a new world record for Great Britain and David Wilkie. What a swim!
Oh, yes. And here is David Wilkie speaking to Tom English in an episode of BBC Radio Scotland's This Sporting Life, telling him how warming up to the idea of swimming took him quite some time.
So I went along to Warrender and did a session, and I couldn't believe that swimmers were going up and down a swimming pool for hours on the end. And to me, that was not something that I was going to be sort of doing for the rest of my life. But, my father said, yeah, David will join. And I hardly ever went training. I just didn't like the discipline. I didn't like the pool. It was freezing cold. The water was going back to chlorine, stank of chlorine. The lane ropes was just, nylon sort of ropes strung between each lane. So, you were getting splashed. You were sort of swimming in a sea of bodies, and it wasn't really fun to me. And as a young guy, I thought, no way am I going to sort of continue doing this. But the years went on, and I think attitudes changed, and I suddenly thought, okay, I might give this a go. But that took a bit of time and a bit of thought on my side, and also a bit of help and a bit of pushing from coach and the boarding school.
David Wilkie there. I can't understate how much of a I can't overstate how much of an icon and celebrity he was back then. I had a huge crush on him when he won that gold. But the long hair, and it was the first time I was aware of a Scot becoming a gold medal winner.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I remember from that time. I think he's the first person I thought, God, somebody from Scotland can be the best in the world at something. And I don't with an air of astonishment about my voice. Of course, I've now realised we can be the best in the world at many, many things. But at that time,
that was the first time I.
Wow! And who else could work a moustache like he could? Well, Mark Spitz, the other great swimmer as well. The pair of them with their 1970s moustaches. I just think it's a fascinating story, and the fact that he retired when he was 22 because he couldn't make any money out of swimming, so he had to go off and make money, which
and he
did.
Became a very successful businessman.
He sold his business for nearly £8 million, so he did pretty well out of it. But just the fact that you couldn't continue in your sport because you had to go out and make a living. I think he's just a real icon, and also the fact that he was the first swimmer to pioneer wearing goggles and a swimming cap. And you think about the high tech shark suits and all the stuff that swimmers use now.
Yeah.
A pair of goggles, that was high tech in those days.
Okay, well, that was David Wilkie, who sadly died this week at the age of 70. And that episode of This Sporting Life is available on BBC Sounds. Now,
discussing the stories making the news.
How many times have you heard this quoted?
Well, that is where our future lies, Rodney. Second-hand motors. This time next year, we'll be millionaires.
Yes, but have sitcoms lost their way a bit? Speaking at an event for the comedy industry this week, BBC comedy boss John Pertwee said that sitcom isn't dead, but that it needs a couple of Barocca and a black Americano with 2 sugars. He wants more gags, more laugh out loud moments. What do you think? Do you think it's kind of lost its way, Sergio?
I think the golden age of sitcoms has passed. I think there'll always be sitcoms, and some of them will continue to be great, but we're never going to go back to the days like in the 70s and the 80s when there were dozens and dozens of fabulous sitcoms. And it doesn't mean that people aren't getting laugh out loud TV or screen entertainment, but we're going to different places. We're going to
maybe
Twitter,
we're going to different
TikTok.
Maybe we're going to different formats as well. It's more comedy drama than actually, sitting with the studio audience kind of.
Well, that's right. One of the listeners who got in touch was talking about Calling from Accounts, which I thought was genius. But I wouldn't actually describe that as a sitcom. It's not a studio sitcom in that sense. And we do have alternatives that we can go to, like TikTok, like online, and that's what people are increasingly doing.
What's your last laugh out loud sitcom?
You see, I was thinking the Dairy Girls, but you were saying, but
I don't know that that's a
comedy
sitcom.
drama. But I just absolutely loved Sister Michael. She just was the best
It was brilliant.
that anyone has ever created in decades on British television.
No, you're right. I think, and it did give you lots of laugh out loud.
It was just brilliant, and every single scene, just every character was believable, and every character had brilliant lines.
Okay, well, comedy writers out there, more of that. Trisha Keir texted in to say, for Belly laugh out loud sitcom, I highly recommend Modern Family. It's right up there with Friends and Outnumbered, in my opinion. I loved it so much. That is it from all of us this week. It's comedy again with Mark Nelson and The Unexpected. We're back next week. Bye-bye.